When I was on the student board of Hillel back in college, they had us do a leadership exercise. Everyone had to choose between qualities and decide which one they felt was most essential in leadership. I only remember two of the choices because I was torn between them. Knowledge was one, kindness was the other. I'm curious which you would choose if we did the exercise here right now. I'm curious which you'd say is the more important trait. Because on one hand, kindness seems a compelling answer. Kindness is everything. You can be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't treat people with kindness, if you're not motivated by a sense of altruism and genuine concern for the well-being of your fellow human being, then what's the point of all that knowledge? But it's easy to make the case for knowledge, too. Because under the surgeon's knife, it's nice if you remember my birthday, and it's nice if you ask me how Rabbi Alex and Noah are doing, but what I really care about is that you know which one is the tonsils and which one is the lungs, and that you only take out one of those. In the end, when tasked with the exercise, I chose kindness. But a friend of mine on the student board, someone whom I deeply respect, chose knowledge. I went on to become a rabbi. He became a senior policy advisor at the White House. So we each carried out those traits to their logical conclusions. I spend my days visiting the sick, celebrating B'nai Mitzvah, and burying the dead. He addresses domestic policy and consumer protection concerns regarding artificial intelligence. We don't have to choose between the two traits. This friend of mine is one of the kindest people I know, and as a rabbi is entrusted with the 4,000-year-old wisdom tradition over which seas of ink have been spilled in the attempt to attain knowledge of divine will, in the attempt to understand what God wants from God's creation. The point, of course, is that we don't have to choose between kindness and knowledge. We should always strive for both. As we read in Psalm 85, Chesed ve'emet nifgashu, tzedek ve'shalom nashaku. Kindness and truth met. Justice and peace have kissed. But if we had to choose for the exercise, I want to make the case for kindness, and I'm going to do it like a rabbi. We're about to read the book of Ruth, chanted to us by Ruth. And if you had to sum up the book of Ruth in one word, it would be chesed, loving kindness. It's the same word from chesed ve'emet nifgashu, kindness and truth met. The story of Ruth is all about chesed. The word itself appears in the book 3 times. You know how I know that? I asked artificial intelligence. The story begins with Naomi, who had traveled from Eretz Yisrael with her husband and 2 sons to Moab, to avoid the famine back home. Her husband dies, but they remain in Moab, where Naomi's 2 sons marry Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. Then Naomi's 2 sons die as well, leaving her alone with her Moabite daughters-in-law. They get word that the famine has ended and that Bethlehem, which literally means house of bread, Beit Lechem, is once again a house of bread. Names are crucial in the book of Ruth because names speak to the qualities and traits of those who bear them. So more on that in a moment. But along the way, Naomi bids her daughters-in-law to turn back. Orpah ultimately acquiesces, but Ruth clings to her mother-in-law, saying, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you." Ruth shows chesed, loving kindness, to the living by honoring Naomi, and she shows chesed to the dead by honoring the memory of her late husband. By the way, kindness toward the dead is considered the greatest act of kindness one can perform because it's the only one that can't possibly be reciprocated. It's called chesed shel emet. Notice how chesed and emet, kindness and truth, literally meet in the phrase chesed shel emet. Once in Bethlehem, though, Ruth faces a major obstacle. She's incredibly vulnerable. A woman in a male-dominated society, a widow, an outsider. Not only is she an outsider, but a Moabite. She's the ultimate outsider. She is biblically forbidden from entering into the Jewish people through conversion or marriage. It says in Deuteronomy 23:4, "No Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of God. Even their descendants are prohibited from marrying into the tribe." The rabbis wrestle with this prohibition and conclude that it only applies to the Moabites and not the Moabitesses. So Ruth is okay. But however you slice it, Ruth is not a highly sought-after bachelorette in Eretz Yisrael. In fact, her nearest of kin, duty-bound to serve as the Goel, the redeemer of his deceased kinsman estate, which includes marrying Ruth and building up the family line through her, he refuses to do it. We read, "Vayomer hagoel lo uchal lig'oli pen ashchit et nachalati ga'al lecha ata et geulati ki lo uchal lig'ol." "You do it," he says to Boaz, who's next in line. "But for me, it's not worth the risk. I would do too much harm to my estate." He doesn't want to serve as the redeemer because he views Ruth, someone with nothing to her name, no money, no prestige, no position of power in society, is a liability to his estate. Which is the great irony of the book of Ruth. This man who fails to show Ruth kindness because he perceives she has nothing to her name, this man's name is Ploni Almoni, which is the biblical equivalent of Joe Schmo. He is the one who has nothing to his name. He isn't even named in the book. By refusing an opportunity to show kindness to an outsider, a widow, a stranger, by refusing to be the redeemer because he wants to protect himself, Ploni Almoni passes up on Ruth. Ruth goes on to marry Boaz and build a family line that produces King David, the most coveted estate in the entire Jewish tradition, the greatest possible name. Ruth is the great-grandmother of King David, through whom our tradition asserts comes the Messiah, the ultimate redeemer. Ploni Almoni, Joe Schmo, lets the truth, lets knowledge as he understood it, get in the way of his chesed, of his kindness. In declining his role as redeemer, he misses the opportunity to build an estate that heralds the very redemption of the Jewish people. The commentator Rashi said it first, Ploni Almoni, velo nichtav shemo lefi shelo ava lig'ol. His name is not recorded because he didn't wish to redeem. There are no small acts of kindness. Yes, we are utterly dependent on the surgeon's knowledge to heal our ailing bodies, but we are also utterly dependent on human loving kindness to heal a broken world and usher us closer to the era of the Messiah. I want to end with one more fascinating story from our tradition. It's a midrash, a rabbinic narrative interpretation, that imagines the moment before God creates the world. It goes like this. When the Holy Blessed One came to create the first human being, the ministering angels divided into two groups. The first group shouted, "Do not create humanity," while the second group responded with a quiet whisper, "Create humanity." The Midrash, in this case, reads the verse, "Kindness and truth met, righteousness and peace kissed," not as an affectionate embrace, but as this impassioned debate. Kindness, chesed, speaking for the one group, says, "Create human beings because they will perform acts of kindness." But truth, knowledge, emet, speaking for the other opposing group, says, "Do not create human beings. They will fill the world with lies." Righteousness steps forward and says, "Create human beings, for they will do acts of righteousness." But peace, too, steps forward from the other team and says, "Do not create human beings. They will only fill your world with war." The Midrash continues, what did the Holy Blessed One do? God took truth, knowledge, emet, and cast it to the earth. As it's written in the book of Daniel, you cast truth earthward. The angels protest, oh God, isn't your very seal, emet, truth? How can you demean truth in this way? God responds that truth will spring forth from the earth, which comes from our book of Psalms. The truth of what humanity will ultimately be resides with us here on earth. We have knowledge of good and we have knowledge of evil. The path we take is up to us. We decide which group of angels was right about us. The Midrash concludes, while the angels were busy arguing with one another, the Holy Blessed One created humanity. God said to the angels, why are you still debating? Humanity has already been created. I still don't think that there's a clear answer as to which trait is more important, knowledge or kindness, truth. Our tradition clearly values both. But look at this Midrash, and look at the book of Ruth. God supplants knowledge, casting it earthward, and decides to create the world with loving kindness, with chesed. And it's Ruth and Boaz's acts of chesed that we believe ultimately redeems that world. Ruth clings to Naomi despite the knowledge that Naomi has no sons to offer. Boaz clings to Ruth despite the knowledge that she has nothing to her name. When tasked with the exercise, they both cast knowledge aside and pursue chesed. Kindness in Judaism is how you make a name for yourself. It isn't just about what you know. It's about who you help. It's about who you are. Theologian and professor Ellen Davis said in her sermon on Ruth, which was originally taught to me by my friend Rabbi Emmanuel Cantor, and I'll end with this, she writes, Ruth refutes the great man theory of history, the notion that all the really important events occur in war rooms or on battlefields or even on holy mountains. The story gives hope because it shows ordinary people helping each other grow through and beyond personal tragedy. And what opens up through acts of generosity and mutual regard is something far beyond their own small sphere, beyond what they know or imagine. Probably none of them ever saw the grandbaby, the great-grandson to be precise, whose name is the last word, literally the last word of their story. Yet what opens up through David is the future God intends for Israel. We all have the potential to be the Goel, a redeemer for someone else in need. It isn't all about the earth-shattering breakthroughs our knowledge can produce. It's about the small acts of kindness that, unbeknownst to us, herald in the era of the Messiah. Chag Sameach. We're going to chant now the book of Ruth.